My name is Louise, and I am 32 years old, working as a trauma therapist in Boston. 7 years ago, on the night of my 25th birthday, my life changed forever. My stepfather, Frank, a man who had terrorized our family for over a decade, broke into my apartment in a drunken rage. As he dislocated my shoulder and I collapsed to the floor, my mother just stood there watching. Before I share how that horrifying night transformed my life, let me know where you are watching from, and please subscribe if you want to hear more stories about overcoming adversity. My childhood was relatively peaceful until I turned 8. That was when my biological father died from aggressive lung cancer, leaving my mother Diane and me to navigate life without him. For 4 years, it was just the two of us in our small suburban home outside of Boston. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat financially, but despite her exhaustion, she always made time for me. We would have movie nights every Friday, bake cookies on weekends, and she never missed a single school event. Those years were challenging, but our bond grew stronger through the hardship. Everything changed when I turned 12. Mom met Frank at the bank where she had recently started working as a teller. He was the branch manager, a seemingly respectable man with a steady job and financial stability. I still remember the first time she brought him home for dinner. He arrived with a bouquet of flowers for Mom and a book about astronomy for me, having heard from Mom that I was fascinated by stars. Frank was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. At first I was hesitant, still missing my dad, but Frank never pushed. He took things slow often, including me in their outings to the zoo or museum. After 6 months of dating, Frank proposed, and they married when I was 13. The wedding was small, but elegant, just like Mom wanted. Frank had money, much more than we were used to, and he moved us into his spacious colonial house in an upscale neighborhood. I got my own room with a new computer and bookshelf. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. The changes were subtle at first. Frank insisted on managing all the finances, convincing Mom to close her personal bank account and merge everything with his. He had logical explanations for everything. It was more efficient, they would save on fees, they were a family now. Mom agreed, perhaps too easily, desperate to believe she had found security again. Then Frank started having opinions about Mom's friends. Karen was too gossipy. Susan was a bad influence with her divorce talk. Jennifer spent too frivolously and would encourage Mom to do the same. One by one, Mom's social circle shrank as she stopped reaching out to avoid Frank's disapproving comments. Phone calls became less frequent and visits almost non-existent. I noticed Mom changing too. The woman who once sang while cooking now moved silently around the kitchen. She checked with Frank before making any purchases, even small ones. Her vibrant wardrobe gave way to more conservative clothes that Frank deemed appropriate. She stopped wearing the bright red lipstick she had always loved. The first time I saw Frank's anger, I was 14. Mom had bought a dress without consulting him first. It was not expensive, just a simple sundress for a staff picnic. But Frank exploded. He did not hit her, not that time, but he threw his dinner plate against the wall, shattering it, and leaving spaghetti sauce dripping down our cream-colored wallpaper like blood. He called her irresponsible, financially reckless, and ungrateful. Mom apologized, repeatedly returned the dress the next day, and never shopped alone again. By the time I started high school, I had developed strategies to minimize contact with Frank. I joined every after-school club possible, studied at the library, and spent weekends at friends' houses. When I was home, I stayed in my room, door closed, emerging only when necessary. Frank never explicitly forbade me from these activities, likely because he preferred me out of the way. My relationship with Mom deteriorated during those years. I resented her for choosing Frank over our once close relationship. When I tried to talk to her about Frank's controlling behavior, She dismissed my concerns. "You do not understand adult relationships," she would say. "Frank takes care of us. We are lucky to have him." Eventually, I stopped trying to reach her. We lived in the same house, but existed in separate worlds. In my junior year, I walked in on Mom covering a bruise on her cheek with makeup. She claimed she had walked into a door in the dark, but her eyes would not meet mine in the mirror. That was the moment I knew with certainty that Frank had progressed from emotional to physical abuse. I begged her to leave him. She refused, insisting it was just a one-time mistake, that Frank had been stressed about work. I knew better. But at 16, I felt powerless to help someone who would not help herself. The next 2 years were a careful dance of avoidance and planning. I maintained perfect grades, knowing education was my ticket out. I researched colleges far from home, applied for every scholarship available, and worked part-time at a local bookstore to save money. Frank seemed pleased with my academic success, viewing it as a reflection of his good parenting, and largely left me alone. Mom grew increasingly withdrawn, a shadow of the woman who had once been my best friend and fiercest protector. When my acceptance letter from Boston University arrived, along with a substantial scholarship, I felt like I could finally breathe. Frank was surprisingly supportive, probably because my achievements reflected well on him in the community, and perhaps because he was eager to have me out of the house. Mom seemed torn between pride and fear. The night before I left for college, she came to my room after Frank was asleep. "I am proud of you," she whispered, sitting on the edge of my bed, like she used to when I was little. "You are going to do amazing things." There was something in her voice, a mixture of sadness and longing, that made my heart ache. "Come with me," I said impulsively. "We could get an apartment together. You could find a job in Boston." She shook her head, that familiar look of resignation settling over her features. "This is my life now, Louise. But it does not have to be yours. Promise me you will build a good life no matter what." The next morning, Frank drove us to Boston in tense silence. He helped carry my boxes up to the dorm room, playing the role of devoted stepfather perfectly in front of my roommate and her parents. When it was time to leave, Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "I love you," in my ear. Frank gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder and a check for emergencies. I never cashed it. My first semester at college was like emerging from a dark cave into sunlight. I made friends who knew nothing about my home life, joined study groups, and even tried out for the debate team. My roommate Zoe was studying journalism and introduced me to her eclectic group of friends. For the first time in years, I felt normal, unburdened by the constant tension of living with Frank. I declared psychology as my major during sophomore year, driven by a need to understand what had happened to my family. Why did Mom stay with Frank? Why did Frank need to control and hurt others? Could I have done something differently? My professors noticed my intensity, my desperate need for answers. Professor Sarah Levine took a particular interest in my academic progress. A specialist in trauma and domestic violence, she became my mentor and eventually a friend. During office hours one day, I finally opened up about my home situation. Instead of pity, she offered understanding and practical advice. She recommended books, connected me with support groups for adult children of abusive households, and encouraged me to consider therapy. "The patterns we grow up with shape us," she explained, "but they do not have to define us. Understanding them is the first step to breaking free." Communication with Mom became increasingly difficult during those years. Our phone calls were brief and superficial, always when Frank was at work. She never shared anything meaningful about her life, deflecting my questions with vague reassurances that everything was fine. I came home for holidays during freshman year. but the atmosphere was so stifling that I found excuses to stay at school for most breaks after that. Mom would visit me occasionally, always alone, always looking over her shoulder as if Frank might materialize behind her. To support myself, I worked at the university library 20 hours a week. The quiet, organized environment was soothing, and my supervisor was flexible with my class schedule. I was determined to be financially independent, refusing to rely on any money connected to Frank. I lived frugally, shopped at thrift stores, and learned to cook cheap, healthy meals in the dorm kitchen. During junior year, I met Eric in my abnormal psychology class. He was studying to become a clinical social worker, passionate about helping at-risk youth. Unlike the few guys I had dated casually before Eric was patient and perceptive, he noticed when certain topics made me uncomfortable and never pushed for more than I was ready to share. Gradually, I told him about my family, testing his reactions with small revelations before trusting him with the full story. "Your mom needs help," he said after hearing about her situation. "But so do you. Having a parent in an abusive relationship affects you too, even from a distance." With Eric's encouragement, I started seeing a therapist through the university's counseling center. Dr. Melissa helped me work through my complicated feelings of love, anger, and guilt regarding my mother and my fear and resentment of Frank. Slowly, I began to understand that I could not save Mom if she was not ready to leave, but I could build my own healthy life. I graduated summa cum laude with Professor Levine writing glowing recommendations for graduate programs. Mom attended my graduation ceremony, sitting alone in the audience, while Frank claimed a work emergency. She looked older than her 47 years. Her once vibrant brown hair now streaked with gray, her posture slightly stooped, as if perpetually bracing for impact. We went to dinner afterward, just the two of us, at a small Italian restaurant near campus. "I always knew you would do something special," she said, smiling genuinely. "For the first time in years, your father would have been so proud." I took her hand across the table. "I am staying in Boston. I found an apartment and a job at a community mental health center. You could visit any time, stay as long as you want." She squeezed my hand, then withdrew it to fiddle with her napkin. "I will try. Things are just busy with Frank's work schedule and the house." Her voice trailed off, and I knew she was afraid to make promises she could not keep. We parted with tight hugs and tentative plans for her to visit that summer. As I watched her taxi drive away, I wondered if I would ever have my real mother back. After graduation, I settled into my one-bedroom apartment in a converted brownstone in Somerville, a short subway ride from downtown Boston. The rent stretched my budget thin, but having my own secure space was worth every penny. My job at the Riverside Community Mental Health Center was entry-level assisting licensed therapists with their paperwork and occasionally sitting in on group therapy sessions. The pay was modest, but the experience was invaluable, especially when combined with the part-time graduate courses I was taking in clinical psychology. 6 months into my new life, I received an unexpected message from Eric. We had broken up amicably before graduation, both focused on our careers and unsure about maintaining a long-distance relationship as he had accepted a position in Chicago. His message was simple. He was moving back to Boston for a new job opportunity and wondered if I would like to get coffee and catch up. Our reunion coffee turned into dinner, which evolved into regular dates. Eric had matured during our time apart, more confident in his skills and clearer about his goals. He now worked for a nonprofit organization that provided counseling services to low-income families, particularly those affected by addiction. We slipped back into our relationship with surprising ease, both more self-aware and better at communicating than we had been in college. One evening, during a video call with Mom, I noticed a yellowish bruise fading around her right eye. When I asked about it, she nervously adjusted her webcam and claimed she had tripped on the stairs while carrying laundry. The explanation might have been plausible if not for the way her eyes darted around, likely checking if Frank was within earshot. "Mom," I said gently, "you know you can tell me anything, right? If something is happening, I can help." "Everything is fine, sweetie," she insisted, plastering on a smile that did not reach her eyes. "How is your new project at work going?" The abrupt change of subject was typical, but I decided not to push. Instead, I started calling more frequently at different times of day, hoping to catch her when she felt safer to talk. I also befriended Catherine, a colleague who specialized in domestic violence cases. Without breaking confidentiality about Mom, I asked general questions about how abuse escalates and what resources were available for victims. The most dangerous time is when they try to leave, Catherine explained during one lunch break. That is when control is threatened and abusers often escalate to prevent losing their victim. Any escape plan needs to prioritize safety above all else. I started researching domestic violence shelters in my parents' area, saving phone numbers and addresses in a password-protected document on my computer. I looked into legal options, restraining orders, and support groups, all while knowing that none of it would help unless Mom was willing to take that first terrifying step. 3 months before my 25th birthday, Mom called while I was having dinner with Eric at my apartment. Her voice was shaking, barely audible. "He found the brochure," she whispered. "What brochure?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "For the Women's Center, the one you mailed me." He went through my purse. She was crying now, trying to keep quiet. "He says I am ungrateful, that I am planning to leave him after everything he has done for me. He broke my phone. I am using the neighbor's landline while he is out." My heart raced. "Mom, listen to me. Pack a small bag, only essentials. I will call you an Uber to the bus station. You can come stay with me. We will figure everything out once you are safe." "I cannot just leave," she protested weakly. "The house, my job, what would people think?" "None of that matters if you are not safe," I insisted. "Please, Mom, I am afraid of what he might do." There was a long pause. "Maybe you are right," she finally said. "Let me think about it. I will call you back tomorrow when he is at work." Eric, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, looked concerned. "Do you think she is in immediate danger? Should we call the local police for a welfare check?" "I do not know," I admitted. "Frank is careful. He has never done anything that would get him arrested. If we call the police and nothing happens, it might just make things worse for her." We stayed up late discussing options with Eric, helping me refine a safety plan for Mom. I barely slept, waiting for her call the next day. When it finally came, my heart sank at her first words. "Everything is fine now," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "Frank and I had a good talk. He explained that he was just worried about me being influenced by negative people. We are going to start marriage counseling." I could hear the lie in every syllable, could picture Frank standing next to her, monitoring every word. "Mom, are you sure? You know you can tell me if—" "Absolutely sure," she interrupted. "Oh, Frank wants to say hello." Before I could protest, his voice came through the speaker, smooth and controlled as always. "Louise, how nice to hear you have been keeping in touch with your mother. I hope you are not filling her head with nonsense about our relationship." "I just want her to be safe and happy," I replied carefully. "She is both those things with me," he said, a subtle threat underlying his pleasant tone. "Perhaps you should focus on your own life instead of trying to interfere in ours. Family is sacred, Louise. Remember that." The call ended abruptly. Frantic with worry, I contacted the local police department and explained the situation. The officer was sympathetic. but explained that without evidence of a crime or direct testimony from my mother, there was little they could do. If she calls and says she is in danger, we will respond immediately, he assured me. But we cannot force help on someone who is not asking for it. Frustrated and scared, I tried calling Mom repeatedly over the next few weeks, but always got voicemail. The few text messages I received were clearly composed under Frank's supervision, generic updates about gardening projects and community events. As my birthday approached, the knot of anxiety in my stomach grew tighter. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, but I was powerless to fix it from 200 miles away. My 25th birthday fell on a Friday in late October. The air had turned crisp, with leaves crunching underfoot as I walked home from the subway after work. Under normal circumstances, I might have planned a celebration with friends or a romantic dinner with Eric. Instead, I had agreed to let him take me out the following evening as he had an unavoidable client emergency that Friday night. I will make it up to you tomorrow, he promised, kissing me goodbye that morning. We will have the best belated birthday celebration ever. My colleagues had surprised me with cupcakes and a small gift card at lunch, and throughout the day, birthday wishes trickled in via text and social media. I tried calling Mom several times, but as expected, there was no answer. I left a cheerful voicemail, making no mention of the tension from our last conversation, simply saying I loved her and hoped to hear from her soon. My apartment welcomed me with familiar comfort that evening. Located on the third floor of a well-maintained brownstone, it featured high ceilings, wooden floors, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The security was decent, with a main entrance that required a key fob and solid locks on individual apartment doors. I had made the space my own, with second-hand furniture plants and framed psychology articles I found particularly inspiring. It was small, but felt safe, a sanctuary from the chaos of my childhood. I treated myself to takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, opened a bottle of wine, and settled on the couch with a novel I had been meaning to read. Around 9, Eric called to wish me happy birthday again and promised that tomorrow's celebration would be worth the wait. By 11, I had changed into pajamas and was drifting off to sleep, the novel abandoned on my nightstand. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. Disoriented, I fumbled for my phone to check the time, 12:17 a.m. The pounding continued, growing more insistent, interspersed now with a voice I recognized with horrifying clarity. "Open this door." Louise Frank's voice slurred, but unmistakable. "I know you are in there." Heart racing, I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Frank stood in the hallway, face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. Behind him, partially obscured, stood my mother, her expression a mask of terror. Frank pounded again, the door shuddering in its frame. "What are you doing here?" I called through the door, trying to keep my voice steady, while frantically typing a text to Eric with one hand. "It is after midnight." "We came to wish you happy birthday," Frank replied, with a grotesque attempt at joviality. "Open up, Louise. Do not be rude to your parents." "Please go away," I said louder now. "I will call the police if you do not leave." That was when something in Frank snapped. "You ungrateful little bitch," he roared, launching his body against the door with such force that the wood splintered around the lock. 2 more powerful kicks, and the door gave way entirely, Frank stumbling into my apartment with murderous rage in his eyes. I backed away, phone clutched in my hand. "I am calling 911, I warned, fingers already dialing. Frank lunged forward with surprising speed for a man his size. He knocked the phone from my hand, sending it skittering across the floor. Before I could react, His fingers tangled in my hair, yanking me forward so violently that pain exploded across my scalp. His other hand formed a fist that connected with my cheekbone, sending stars across my vision. "Frank, stop!" My mother's voice, thin and terrified, from the doorway. "Please, you are hurting her." He ignored her, dragging me by the hair across the living room and slamming me into the wall. My head cracked against the plaster, dazing me momentarily. I tried to fight back, clawing at his face, kicking at his shins, but Frank outweighed me by at least 100 pounds. "Mom, help me!" I screamed, making eye contact with her over Frank's shoulder. She stood frozen in the doorway, hands covering her mouth, eyes wide with horror but body immobile. "Please, Mom." Frank spun me around, grabbed my right arm, and twisted it behind my back, pushing upward with savage force. There was a sickening pop as my shoulder dislocated, pain so intense that my vision tunneled to pinpricks of light in a sea of darkness. I screamed, the sound primal and agonized. "This is what happens when you try to destroy a family," Frank hissed in my ear, his breath hot and reeking of whiskey. "This is what you deserve." He slammed me against the wall again, my already injured shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The pain was blinding, nauseating. I felt something crack in my ribcage as he punched me again, this time in the side. Another blow caught my temple, sending me sprawling to the floor. Through swelling eyes, I saw my phone just inches from my outstretched left hand. With the last of my strength, I lunged for it, my fingers finding the emergency SOS button I had programmed. 3 quick presses sent my location to emergency services. Frank's foot connected with my ribs again, and I curled into a protective ball, tasting blood, feeling consciousness slipping away. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was my mother's face, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mouth forming words I could no longer hear. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder, then fading, as I slipped into unconsciousness. The steady beeping of a heart monitor pulled me from darkness. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but I managed to open them to a blur of white ceiling and fluorescent lights. Pain radiated from seemingly everywhere, particularly my right shoulder and rib cage. A warm pressure on my left hand drew my attention, and I turned my head slightly to see Eric sitting beside the hospital bed. His fingers intertwined with mine, his head bowed in what looked like prayer or exhaustion. "Eric," I tried to say, but it came out as a rasp. His head snapped up, relief washing over his tired features. "Louise," he whispered, leaning closer. "Thank God. Let me get the nurse." He pressed a button, and moments later, a nurse bustled in, followed by a doctor in a white coat. They checked my vitals, asked me questions to assess my mental state, and explained my injuries. "You have a dislocated right shoulder, which we reduced while you were unconscious," the doctor explained. 2 fractured ribs on your right side, facial contusions, and a mild concussion. You were lucky the police arrived when they did. Do you remember what happened?" The memories flooded back in horrifying clarity. Frank breaking down my door, the first punch, my mother watching, the sickening pop of my shoulder. I nodded slowly, wincing at the pain the movement caused. "Frank," I managed. "My stepfather, he attacked me. My mother was there too. Are they?" "Your stepfather is in custody," Eric said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "The police arrested him at the scene. Your mother is in the waiting room. She has been here all night, but was afraid to come in." A police officer arrived shortly after, a woman with kind eyes and a notebook. She introduced herself as Officer Rivera and explained she needed my statement while events were still fresh in my mind. With Eric holding my hand for support, I recounted everything from the midnight pounding on my door to losing consciousness as sirens approached. We have your stepfather in custody on charges of breaking and entering assault and battery, Officer Rivera confirmed. Your emergency call recorded parts of the attack, and the evidence of forced entry is clear. Your injuries and the medical report will support the case. The question now is whether you want to press charges. Yes, I said, without hesitation. I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent possible. Officer Rivera nodded. Good. Too often in domestic cases, victims are afraid to go forward. There will be paperwork to sign when you are feeling better. We will also need to talk about a restraining order. After she left, Eric filled in the gaps in my memory. He had received my partial text and called the police himself when I did not answer his frantic callbacks. He arrived at my apartment shortly after the ambulance, finding the door smashed in and blood on the living room wall. The police had Frank handcuffed in a patrol car and were trying to calm my hysterical mother. She has been a mess, Eric said gently, alternating between crying and completely shutting down. She gave a statement to the police that confirms everything you said. I think she is in shock. I was still processing this information when a soft knock came at the door. My mother stood there looking smaller than I remembered, her face pale and drawn dark circles beneath puffy eyes. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. Eric looked at me questioningly, and I nodded. He squeezed my hand, then stood. "I will get some coffee and give you two some privacy." As the door closed behind him, Mom approached the bed slowly, as if afraid I might send her away. When she saw my face up close, the bruises now turning purple, she covered her mouth with her hand, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Louise, I am so sorry." Part of me wanted to turn away to reject her apology as too little too late. But the larger part saw what I had missed during our video calls, the haunted look in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she flinched at sudden movements. Classic signs of trauma that I had been trained to recognize in others, but had somehow overlooked in my own mother. "Sit down, Mom," I said, gesturing to the chair Eric had vacated. She perched on the edge, hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I never thought he would hurt you," she said. "He threatened to so many times, but I thought it was just talk. I thought if I stayed with him, if I did everything he wanted, he would leave you alone." "How long has he been hurting you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Since about a year after we married," she admitted. "It started with pushing, grabbing too hard, then slaps that he would apologize for immediately. Promise never to do again. By the time it got really bad, I was trapped. He controlled all our money, isolated me from friends, convinced me I was worthless and lucky to have him." She took a shuddering breath. "He threatened to kill you if I ever left him. Said he would find you no matter where you went. I believed him, Louise. I stayed to protect you, but in the end, I failed anyway." The twisted logic of abuse victims, something I had studied but never fully understood until that moment. My mother had endured years of torment, believing it was the only way to keep me safe, while I had resented her for not leaving. "What made him come after me now?" I asked. "Your birthday card," she replied. "You sent a card with a note saying your door was always open for me. Frank found it, went into a rage. He had been drinking all evening, getting angrier and angrier. He kept saying you were trying to steal me away, destroy our marriage. He forced me into the car, said he was going to teach you a lesson." She broke down completely, then sobbing into her hands. "I should have stopped him. I should have done something. When he started hitting you, I froze. I have never hated myself more than in that moment." A nurse came in to check my pain levels and administer medication. By the time she left, my mother had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes remained red, rimmed, and haunted. The police want to know if I am pressing charges, I told her. I am. He belongs in prison, Mom. She nodded slowly. I know. I already told them I will testify against him. I am done being afraid, Louise. It took seeing him hurt you to finally understand there is no protecting anyone by staying silent. My colleague Catherine arrived that afternoon having heard about the assault from Eric. She brought resources for both Mom and me, information about victim services, therapy options, support groups. More importantly, she connected us with Jessica, a lawyer who specialized in domestic violence cases. Jessica visited me in the hospital the following day, explaining the legal process ahead. Frank has been denied bail due to the severity of the attack and the flight risk, she informed us. The prosecutor is charging him with multiple felonies. With your testimony and your mother's plus the physical evidence, we have a strong case. Mom stayed in a hotel near the hospital, visiting daily as I recovered. We talked more openly than we had in years, painful conversations about the past and tentative ones about the future. She agreed to see a therapist who specialized in domestic abuse, the first step in a long healing process for both of us. After 5 days, I was discharged with my arm in a sling, prescriptions for pain management, and appointments for follow-up care. Eric insisted I stay at his apartment until mine was repaired and secured with better locks. Mom came too, taking Eric's spare room while I took his bed, and he slept on the couch despite my protests. In those first weeks of recovery, as my body slowly healed and the legal case against Frank took shape, Mom and I began the delicate process of rebuilding our relationship. There were moments of tension, of unspoken resentment, bubbling to the surface, but also moments of unexpected connection. We were two survivors now bound by shared trauma, but also by the possibility of freedom from Frank's shadow. 3 months after the attack, I stood outside the Suffolk County Courthouse, my hand gripping Eric's tightly. My shoulder had healed enough that I no longer needed the sling, though certain movements still caused pain. The physical therapist said I might always have some limitation in that joint, a permanent reminder of that night. The courthouse was imposing with its granite columns and broad steps designed to intimidate with its grandeur. Inside, the polished marble floors echoed with hurried footsteps, whispered conversations, and the occasional commanding voice calling a case number or name. The air smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. Jessica met us in the lobby, professional, in a navy suit, her briefcase bulging with documents. "Are you ready?" she asked, her eyes, evaluating my emotional state. I nodded, adjusting the collar of my own suit chosen carefully to project strength and credibility. As ready as I will ever be. Mom joined us moments later, having arrived separately from the domestic violence shelter where she had been staying. The weeks of safety and support had begun to transform her. She stood straighter, made eye contact more consistently, spoke with greater confidence. The shelter had connected her with job counseling and helped her start the divorce process. Frank is already inside, with his attorney Jessica informed us. Remember what we practiced. Answer questions directly. Do not let them provoke emotional responses. We have the facts and evidence on our side. The courtroom fell silent as we entered, all eyes turning to assess us. Frank sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. He looked more like a CEO than a man accused of violent assault. Beside him sat his lawyer Thomas Wilson, known for representing wealthy clients and securing favorable outcomes through aggressive tactics. Frank's eyes met mine briefly, a flash of contempt crossing his features before he composed himself. I refused to look away, first holding his gaze, until he turned to whisper something to his attorney. That small victory steadied me as we took our seats behind the prosecution table. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecutor, Maria Delgado, outlined the case clearly and forcefully, detailing the break in the assault and my injuries. She highlighted Frank's history of controlling behavior and the premeditated nature of the attack. Wilson's opening painted a vastly different picture. Frank, as a concerned stepfather, worried about my influence on my mother, who had gone to have a conversation that escalated when I allegedly became hysterical and attacked him, forcing him to defend himself. The fabrication was so outrageous, I had to grip the bench to keep from objecting. "They will try to twist everything," Jessica whispered. "Let the evidence speak for itself." When called to testify, I walked to the witness stand with deliberate, calm, swore to tell the truth, and face the courtroom. For nearly 2 hours, I answered the prosecutor's questions describing my childhood. After Frank entered our lives, the escalating control, the isolation of my mother, and finally, in excruciating detail, the events of that October night. And at any point, Delgado asked, "Did you attack or threaten Mr. Sullivan prior to him breaking down your door?" "No," I stated firmly. "I never even opened the door. I asked him to leave and said I would call the police if he did not." Wilson's cross-examination was exactly as Jessica had prepared me for: aggressive, manipulative, designed to provoke emotional responses that might make me appear unstable. "Is it not true, Miss Moore, that you have been trying to separate your mother from your stepfather for years?" he demanded. "I have been trying to help my mother escape an abusive relationship," I corrected calmly. "And you sent materials about leaving one's spouse to your mother's home, knowing they would likely be discovered by Mr. Sullivan." "I sent information about domestic violence resources because I feared for her safety." He attempted to paint me as vindictive, resentful of Frank's authority, determined to destroy their marriage out of jealousy. With each question, I took a breath before answering, sticking to facts, refusing to be baited into anger. My mother's testimony the following day was both heartbreaking and powerful. Her voice shook initially as she described 12 years of escalating abuse, but grew stronger as she detailed Frank's threats, the financial control, the isolation, and finally the night he forced her into the car to confront me. "He said he was going to teach Louise a lesson for trying to turn me against him," she testified. "I was terrified he would hurt her, but too afraid to defy him. When he started hitting her, I froze. It was like watching a nightmare I could not wake up from." Wilson's attempt to discredit her by suggesting she was mentally unstable or seeking financial gain through divorce backfired when Mom calmly described how Frank had ensured she had no access to money, no credit in her name, no way to support herself independently. The medical evidence was presented next: photographs of my injuries, the doctor's report detailing the dislocated shoulder, fractured ribs, concussion, and facial contusions. The emergency room physician testified about the significant force required to cause such injuries. The jury visibly reacted to the images, several members looking at Frank with undisguised disgust. Officer Rivera and her partner described the scene they found at my apartment: the broken door, blood on the wall, my unconscious form on the floor, Frank still raging as they restrained him. The partial recording from my emergency call was played in court, my screams and Frank's threats filling the silent room. Throughout the week-long trial, I endured Frank's cold stare each day, refusing to be intimidated. Eric sat beside me constantly, his presence a steady anchor. My colleagues from the mental health center came to show support, as did Professor Levine, who had driven up from Boston University. On the final day during closing arguments, I requested permission to address the court directly. The judge, after conferring with both attorneys, allowed it. Standing before the jury, I spoke from the heart. What happened to me that night was not an isolated incident of rage, but the culmination of years of control and abuse. My stepfather did not just attack me physically, he spent years systematically destroying my mother's sense of self, isolating her from support, convincing her that his abuse was love and protection. Domestic violence thrives in silence and shame. Today, by speaking the truth, my mother and I refuse to be silenced any longer. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before returning with their verdict. As the four women stood, the courtroom fell completely silent. On the charge of breaking and entering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault and battery with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty. Relief washed over me so intense I nearly collapsed. Mom gripped my hand, tears streaming down her face. Frank's composed facade finally cracked his face, contorting with rage as the bailiffs approached to take him into custody. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, the judge showed no leniency. "Mr. Sullivan, you have used your position of trust to terrorize your family for years. This court sentences you to 15 years in state prison." As they led Frank away, I felt a weight lift that I had carried for so long I had forgotten what it was like to stand straight. For the first time since I was 12 years old, I could breathe freely without fear of the man who had cast such a long shadow over our lives. 2 years after the trial, on a bright spring morning, I stood before a small audience in the community room of the Boston Women's Shelter. My hair had grown out, since I had cut it short, after the attack now falling in soft waves past my shoulders. The physical scars had faded, though my right shoulder still ached in cold weather and would never regain its full range of motion. "My name is Louise Moore," I began, "and today I want to talk about the journey from victim to survivor to thriver." The women watching me knew parts of my story already. Some had attended support groups I facilitated. Others had received counseling at the Breakthrough Center, the organization I had founded with my recently completed master's degree in trauma psychology. After the trial, I had thrown myself into completing my education, determined to turn my experience into something meaningful. With guidance from Professor Levine and a grant from a Victims Advocacy Foundation, I had established a small but growing center dedicated to helping domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. 2 years ago, I lay in a hospital bed, broken physically and emotionally, I continued. Today, I stand before you, not because the pain magically disappeared, but because I learned to carry it differently. Healing is not a straight line. It is messy and non-linear. There are setbacks and breakthroughs, often on the same day. My mother sat in the front row, pride evident in her smile. She had lived with me for 6 months after the trial, attending therapy 3 times a week, gradually finding her voice and identity again. Now she had her own apartment near mine and worked part-time at a local bookstore, slowly building an independent life. Our relationship had transformed through countless difficult conversations, tears, and eventually genuine forgiveness. Not forgiveness for Frank, but for ourselves and each other. For the times we had failed to understand, failed to act, failed to support one another under impossible circumstances. The hardest lesson I learned, I told the audience, was that you cannot save someone who is not ready to be saved, but you can create a safe space for them to come to when they are ready. You can leave a light on in the darkness. Eric sat beside my mother, the diamond on my left hand, catching the light when I gestured. Our engagement was recent, a step we had taken only after much thought and discussion. Eric had been patient, understanding that trauma changes a person's relationship with trust and intimacy. He had never pushed, never rushed, simply remained steady as I worked through my healing process. The physical recovery had been challenging. Months of physical therapy had restored most function to my shoulder, though certain movements remained painful. The nightmares had been worse, vivid recreations of the attack that left me drenched in sweat and trembling. With therapy and medication, they had gradually decreased, now occurring only during particularly stressful periods. Trauma lives in the body, I explained to the group. It affects us physically, emotionally, spiritually. Healing must address all these dimensions. I had practiced what I preached, combining traditional therapy with yoga, meditation, and even art classes. Painting had become an unexpected outlet, my amateur attempts at expressing emotion through color and form hanging in my office as reminders of the healing journey. My mother had found her own path to recovery. After decades of having her preferences dismissed by Frank, she had systematically rediscovered herself, her favorite foods, colors, music, hobbies. She had started wearing bright red lipstick again, taken up gardening, joined a book club. Small acts of reclamation that together formed a new identity, one defined by choice rather than fear. The turning point in my healing, I continued, came when I realized that holding on to hatred for my abuser was keeping me connected to him. By focusing my energy on anger, I was allowing him to continue controlling my emotional life from prison. True freedom came with letting go, not of accountability, but of the corrosive power of hatred. This had been the most difficult aspect of recovery. The rage had felt righteous, protective, necessary. Learning to release it without minimizing the harm done had taken the guidance of skilled therapists and the support of others who understood from experience. The Breakthrough Center had grown beyond my initial vision. We now offered individual counseling, support groups, career development workshops, and housing assistance. A network of volunteer attorneys provided legal guidance. Former clients returned as peer mentors, creating a community of mutual support. One such success story was Nancy, a woman in her 40s who had attended one of my first public speaking engagements. After 15 years with an abusive husband, she had found the courage to leave inspired, partly by hearing my story. Now she volunteered at the center, her accounting skills proving invaluable to clients rebuilding financial independence. The greatest myth about abuse, I told the audience, is that it only happens to certain types of people, those who are weak or codependent. The truth is that abuse can happen to anyone. Victims do not need our judgment, they need our compassion and practical support. As I concluded my talk, I looked around at the faces before me, some bearing visible scars, others carrying wounds invisible to the eye, but no less real. Each person represented both a tragedy and a triumph lives, derailed by violence but refusing to be defined by it. My stepfather took many things from me and my mother, I said. Years of peace, a sense of safety, physical well-being. But he failed to take what matters most, our capacity to heal, to love, to build something new from the wreckage. That resilience lives in every one of you. It is not something special or unique to me. It is the fundamental human ability to begin again, no matter how many times we have been broken. The applause was warm as I finished, several women wiping away tears. As they gathered around to speak with me afterward, sharing their own stories and challenges, I felt the familiar mix of sorrow and hope that now characterized my work. Each conversation reminded me that healing happens in connection, not isolation. We recover ourselves through helping others recover. Later that evening, Eric and I hosted a small dinner at our apartment. My mother brought her famous apple pie. Catherine from work came with her husband, and Professor Levine drove up from the university. Surrounded by this chosen family, I reflected on how far we had all come. A toast, Eric suggested, raising his glass. To Louise, whose courage continues to inspire everyone around her. I shook my head, raising my own glass. To all of us. To choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, and hope over despair. Every single day. As conversation and laughter filled the apartment that had once been the site of such violence, I felt the truth of what I had told the women earlier. Trauma changes you permanently. There is no going back to who you were before. But with support, determination, and time, you can build something new and meaningful from the pieces that remain. What happened that night 7 years ago will always be part of my story, but it is no longer the defining chapter. It is simply one part of a much larger narrative about resilience, compassion, and the transformative power of breaking silence. If you have been touched by this story in any way, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with overcoming adversity or resources that have helped you through difficult times. Remember that subscribing and liking helps these stories reach others who may feel alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening, and remember, no matter what you have endured, healing is always possible, and you are never truly alone.